الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن استنى بسنة يوم الدين. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. In the previous class, we began to look at our subject, which is the evolution of Fiqh, or what they call in Arabic Tarikh at-Tashri'ah. And in the previous session, we looked at some of the issues behind Tarikh at-Tashri'ah, this particular subject. What were the goals? What was the benefits? What did it provide? We said basically it solves the riddle of the madhab, right? And all of the various confused ideas and obscurities connected with following a madhab. After that, we went and looked at the distinction between two major terms which we use in the text as well as we use in our common conversation. Two terms which are synonymously used in English. What are they? Sharia and Fiqh. These are the two terms which are translated loosely as Islamic law, right? But the fact of the matter is that there is a distinction between the two. That Sharia is based on two foundations, which are Qur'an and the Sunnah, which is fundamentally, what is its origin? Revelation, right? That's the distinguishing characteristic. The second, in the case of Fiqh is basically the implementation of those foundations in the general sphere of life to deal with the changing circumstances which are not directly addressed in the Sharia, in the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So we said, as a result of that, there are three major distinctions between the two. One, that the Sharia basically is a body of revealed laws, whereas the Fiqh is a body of deduced laws. One is revealed, the other one is deduced from the revealed. Okay? Next major issue is that Sharia is fixed and inflexible, whereas Fiqh will change according to circumstance and need. The third is that the laws of the Sharia are general, whereas the Fiqh tend to be detailed and specific, working out the various fine issues because we're dealing with different circumstances, over time. So, as your first assignment, you can make a note right now of your first assignment. Your first assignment is to give examples of the difference between Fiqh and Sharia based on point 2 and point 3. You give some practical examples, right? And in doing so, answer the general objection to the application of Islamic law today. What is our general objection? That it is antiquated, that it is outdated, not suitable for these modern times. So basically, when you give the examples, but you give the example within a context, not just pull out examples and give me examples. Your basic question, we could put it the other way around. I could put it this way, the question, understand the question? Explain why the statement that Islamic law is outdated, not suitable to modern times, is false. Right? And yeah, okay, right. You could just put in brackets for yourself using points 2 and 3 of the distinction between fiqh and sharia as your basis, with practical examples. With practical examples. Alright? Following that, we had a brief look at the 6 stages of the development of fiqh, and we stressed the importance of following the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that in fact was the madhab of the Sahaba, the madhab of the Tabi'un, those who came after them, as well as those who came after them, as well as the great Imams, the great scholars of Hadith, and so on and so forth, down through the ages. Now, we are going to begin to look at the first stage. And the first stage is that of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, it's not the first stage, meaning that the time from he was born till the time he died, because we're dealing with law. What happened before he became a messenger of Allah, whatever came to him before he became a messenger of Allah, would not be counted as a basis for law. So therefore, all we're looking at is the 40 years of his apostleship or prophethood. The last 40 years, he received revelation at the age of 40. It's the last 23 years of his life, right? The last 23 years of his life, 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina. So that is the period in terms of Christian era. It's between 609 and 632. In that period, the only source of revelation and for divine law, the only source for divine law was revelation. That was the only source for law. The whole legal system that developed during the era of Prophet Muhammad was all based on revelation. Either revelation which came in the Qur'an or revelation which came in the Sunnah. Either one or the other. But that was, you can say, was the foundation. Why? Because each stage that we'll be looking at the basis for revelation of each stage. We're analyzing to see how that foundation was built, how the different elements were added in the different stages. Right? So the first stage here, this was the stage of revelation. Prophet Muhammad was the legist of the Ummah. He is the one who laid down the laws. Of course, it was based on what was revealed to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Qur'an, which was the divine word, direct word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was combined with the Prophet ﷺ's interpretation in practice of those divine words, how to implement it, and that constituted really the basic source of law. What the Prophet ﷺ said, what he did, and included in that is what he approved. It wasn't something he did, but his tacit approval, meaning things were done in his presence, and he did not object to them, did not prohibit them, etc. That was sufficient to make it a part of his sunnah. Even though he himself may not have done it, others did it in his presence, and he approved it, then that is sufficient. To have something said that, well, during the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, some people did certain things. Some of the Sahaba did certain things. That's not enough to make it legal. Unless it said, they did these things and the Prophet ﷺ knew about it and he said nothing. Because simply doing something in the time of the Prophet ﷺ did not, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't rebuke them, did not automatically make that acceptable unless it was done in his presence. Because the scholars concluded that, of course, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ could not allow anything to be done in his presence which was not acceptable without speaking out against it. He had to. Similarly, anything which he did, which Allah did not want done or did not approve of or whatever, Allah would immediately correct him. Because to leave him uncorrected would be to leave a mistake for the generations to come. So Prophet Muhammad was protected from error, meaning that what he conveyed to us was the whole truth, as they say, and nothing but the truth. It was complete. In conveying that complete message, some of it was through his errors, which Allah corrected and taught us what was the correct way to deal with it. Most of it were the right decisions that he made and guidance, etc., etc., etc. But it did include a portion which were errors which Allah allowed him to make. Because of course Allah could have informed him ahead of time, no, don't do that. Very important point. Allah could have informed Prophet Muhammad ahead of time when he was about to make certain decisions. He could have told him, don't do that. And the Prophet would not have done it. But Allah allowed him to make his own ijtihad in some circumstances, on some occasions, and then correct him. And the value of that, right, value of that is that it reinforces in the minds of the believers coming after that he was a human being. As Allah had him state in the Qur'an, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. Say, indeed, I am a human being like you all. The only difference is that revelation came to me. That my Lord is one Lord. Your Lord is one Lord. That's the difference. The difference was the revelation. Otherwise, he was a human being like other human beings. Meaning, he did also make mistakes. Now, as we said, the source of divine law, the source of law, or the Sharia, or Islamic law, if we use the general term, was that of divine revelation. Now, how did that revelation come? From a legal perspective. It came in a gradual format over 23 years of his prophethood. It came in bits and pieces. And generally speaking, especially when we talk about the legal elements, they came as a result of questions which were asked of him, or the results of issues which arose, problems which needed to be solved. So you find these become the main two factors, right, incidences, various incidents which would occur in the Prophet's time, revelation will come to address it. So you find many verses in the Qur'an which begin with yas'alunaka. They ask you. Like, for example, يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. They ask you about wine and gambling. Say, there is great evil in them as well as benefit to man, but the evil is greater than the benefit. يسألونك, they ask you. Also, we find incidents which occurred wherein revelation came, as in the case of Hilal ibn Umayyah, who came before the Prophet ﷺ accusing his wife of adultery, right? Adultery with another companion of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, either bring the proof, that is 3 witnesses, or you will receive the fixed punishment of 80 lashes on your back. Either bring the proof or take 80 lashes. And this law was there to prevent slander, to prevent, false accusation of people. Very strong law. So accusing somebody of adultery or fornication, very serious accusation, and Islam took it very strongly. And we know about the case of Aisha radiallahu anha, when the rumors circulated that she supposedly had committed, some act of adultery, which was besmirched her character and her name, etc. And then Allah revealed what He revealed concerning it. Anyway, the point is that was the law. Hilal's response was, "O Messenger of Allah, if any of us saw a man on top of his wife, should he go running and looking for 3 witnesses? Is that really reasonable?" That's what he's asking. Is that what we're supposed to do? So the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that, though it was quite a logical response, the Prophet ﷺ, having been given the revelation, he said, you bring your proof or take your lashes. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse in the 24th chapter, that is Surah Nur, verses 6 to 9, in which He said, as for those who accuse their wives and have no evidence but their own, their witness can be 4 declarations with oaths by Allah that they are truthful, and the 5th invoking Allah's curse on themselves if they are lying. So that averts the punishment. If they're bringing this to a court of law, this is not a person, just spreading the rumor, talking to his neighbor and so. He's come to a court of law, because we can say, then anybody can then slander anybody, isn't it? And then just swear this oath, right? But the point is, this is where it's taken to a court. You're taken to the ruler, taken to the authority, I accuse my wife of so-and-so. Not you just spreading rumors about your wife or your husband. It's not allowed. You'll get your 80 lashes for that. Right? So Allah says that it is sufficient for them to make 4 oaths, declaring by Allah that what they're saying is true. That stands for the witnesses, right? The 4 witnesses. On the other hand, Islamic law, Allah to protect the right of women. Otherwise, men could just accuse women and they would be punished according to the law. But Allah also protecting the right of women 1,400 years ago, when women were not considered to be anything. They were chattel, to be bought and sold, possessed as property, etc., etc. Here Allah says, but the punishment will be averted from the wife if she bears witness 4 times with oaths by Allah that he is lying, and a 5th oath invoking Allah's curse on herself if she is telling the truth. So her chastity, her honor is protected by her responding in the same way to what the accusation which was made against her. You know? And this is amongst the evidences when one could say that where Islam upholds the rights of women and put them on an equal footing with regards to men in this regard. In the case of legislation coming from the Sunnah, we find the same principles. Either problems to be solved by the Prophet ﷺ, or direct answers to questions, or revealed during particular incidents. We find this Sunnah and laws of the Sunnah coming in similar circumstances. An example of questions is the hadith concerning the dead animals of the sea. Actually, the hadith was concerning making wudu with salt water. And one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who traveled at sea, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, he had some doubt, because they generally understood that seawater is salty. I mean, fresh water which you make wudu from, it's understood, okay? Whether it's in a river, whether it's in rainwater captured, it's in a pond, you know, whatever. But seawater is salty. You know, you wash in it, gargle your mouth, it doesn't feel like you're cleaning yourself up. It's like you're putting salt in, right? You know. So he had a doubt as to whether you could make wudu with salt water. So he asked about Sallallahu, can we make wudu with salt water, seawater, meaning seawater? The Prophet ﷺ answered this question and gave him what was even more critical. He said, the waters of the sea are pure, meaning you can make wudu with them, pure for wudu, and they also make their dead pure. And even the dead animals of the sea are purified by them. That is the nature of the sea, the salt water. And that's why any comparison between land and sea animals falls apart. For those who try to apply the principles governing land animals to sea animals, meaning, for example, the porpoise in the sea is called khinzirul bahr. The porpoise is called a sea pig. And we have pigs on land. Now the pig is forbidden on land. On the basis of the pig being forbidden on land, some scholars rule that the pig of the sea would be also forbidden. Also, the name used, one of the names used for the shark was kalbul bahr, or sea dog. And as dogs were prohibited on the land, you can't eat them, they reasoned that dogs of the sea should also be prohibited. So they prohibited shark. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ had said, the birds that kill by the claws, the osprey, the eagle, etc., are forbidden for us to eat. So they said, well, the crabs have claws, so we forbid them also. But this relationship is, this kind of deduction is a false deduction, because the animals of the sea are of a different character altogether. On land, we can say generally all of the carnivores, the carnivorous animals, are forbidden. In the sea, most of the fish are carnivorous, and we eat them. Big fish eat smaller fish. That's the general order, right? And the smaller ones eat the smallest. It's just down the line. That's the norm. But we eat them. But there are no fish of the sea which have been forbidden. Even the shark. All are halal. Octopus, whale, everything. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether sharks eat men or not. That's not the factor which makes it prohibited or makes it, permissible. It is the animals of the sea. If we're able to eat the dead animals of the sea, then it means they're in a different category. That means if you find a fish washed ashore or floating in the sea, you can take it out, cook it up, and eat it. No problem. On the land, dead animals are considered to be meta, and you're not allowed to eat them. But the reality is that the animals of the sea, you eat them after they die. You pull them out of the water, they're alive, they flop around until they eventually die. And then you eat them. We don't make dhabah, right? We don't slaughter the fish. So their whole circumstance is different. Of course, common sense tells us that if we see a fish which looks diseased, right? Whether it's been washed ashore or it's in the sea, the sea has become polluted and the fish are dying because of pollution, So you're talking about an unhealthy circumstance. Then common sense tells you don't eat from it, right? That's what common sense. We're talking about fish that naturally die. Because what happens when the life is over and the fish dies? He floats. If somebody doesn't eat him, he gets to the surface. He dies in the sea, you can eat him. Right? So, the laws were revealed in a gradual fashion in order that they would be easier for the Arabs to initially accept them, because they were used to living a life of complete freedom with no laws. Their society was a lawless society. So to immediately put on top of them a whole body of law, so Allah introduced it gradually for them to learn to get. See, because the Arabian desert, the nature of the Bedouin lifestyle is that freedom that you don't find in the big civilizations where cities have been set up, where they have to set up laws to govern this and to govern that, and people's rights and all these kind of things. So this was a means of bringing them into line gradually without major rebellion. Also, the gradual revelation of laws made them easier to learn and to understand. It made them easier to both learn and understand. And this process of gradual legislation was not just limited to the whole legal system in its whole entirety, but even in the enactment of individual laws, we find gradation and legislation taking place. So, for example, in the case of Salah, it said that in the Meccan period it was initially twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Right? Before the Hijrah to Medina, it became 5 times a day, but in 2 rak'ah, right? With the exception of Maghrib. It was 2 rak'ah for each prayer with the exception of Maghrib. Then, following that, it was increased. The daily prayers during the day, Dhuhr, Asr and Isha, the night prayer was increased to 4. Maghrib was kept at 3, and Fajr was left at 2. So this was a gradual stages that the prayers, the obligatory prayers went through. we look at the Qur'an, this is our basic source of revelation, and we look at its contents. Scholars have divided up the contents according to the two major periods of the Prophet ﷺ's life. One called the Meccan period, that basically is from the time of his prophethood, the beginning of his prophethood, until the Hijrah. It's called the Meccan period. Even though it may have included revelation which occurred outside of Mecca. And the Medinan period was considered from the Hijrah till his death, even though some of the revelations came after he came back to Mecca, during Hajj, etc. Revelation came there. It wasn't all in Medina. So Medina and Meccan periods don't necessarily mean revelations which came in Mecca and revelations which came in Medina. But revelations from prophethood, beginning of prophethood until the Hijrah, and from the Hijrah until the Prophet's death. So if we just look at for a minute at the difference in these two stages, right? We could say that the state of the Muslim community in the Meccan period was different from the state in the Medinan period. The circumstances were different. In the Meccan period, give me one primary difference between the Meccan and Medinan period.
The Medinan period, because they were more free, because they had the state and the laws were coming down as to what they need to implement in the Islamic State. The Meccan was mainly because they were living under oppression, they were living under...
Okay, so our basic difference is that in the Meccan period, Muslims lived under pagan rule. And in the Medinan period, they lived under Islamic rule. That's a fundamental difference. In the Meccan period, naturally they were oppressed. They didn't have really community. They had to meet in secret and all these other kinds of factors. Whereas in the Medinan period, they ruled Medina. They ruled the state. Prophet ﷺ was head of state. They made treaties. They established a society. So naturally the revelation, since we said it came to solve problems and issues, to address the questions that were raised, to provide guidance for the time, naturally the quality and the content of the revelation was going to vary accordingly. Right? And when we look at the states that a Muslim could possibly be in, you'll see it is either one or the other. Either you're under un-Islamic rule or you're under Muslim rule. Un-Islamic rule could be with a pagan ruler, or it could be with a Muslim ruler, Muslim in name or whatever, but he's not applying Islamic law, he's applying pagan law, right? So that represents one category. The other category is represented where Muslims are living under Islamic rule, and the different conditions in terms of the enactment or the implementation of laws accordingly. So when we look at the Meccan period, since we're not dealing with Muslim state, then you don't find laws being revealed dealing with these kinds of issues. Mostly now the laws were revealed to build the foundation, the ideological foundation for the next stage to come. So that the people who are going to carry Islam to the world would be spiritually prepared. Their direction honed in that Meccan period. The Meccan period, which one of the writers who wrote on Islamic, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he called it the Meccan Crucible. The Meccan Crucible. Zakaria Bashir, he did a 3-part series on the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Very good series. Anyway, he called it the first part the Meccan Crucible. Crucible is a sort of cup in which is used in the labs, where you put various material in. You might crush up the stuff there, to use it for something, or you might heat it, burn it, or melt it, or whatever. But whatever is happening inside of that cup is, some kind of burning, crushing. So that was Mecca. It was a trying time for Muslims. So naturally, what the revelation addressed in terms of its content was, first and foremost, Allah's unity, the oneness of Allah. That's the essence of the message. This was a society which believed in Allah. They had a belief in Allah already, but they had put so many intermediaries between Allah and themselves that really few people worshipped Allah. Everybody worshipped their favorite common gods, personal gods, right? You could say virtually, right? As Umar ibn al-Khattab had related, in a particular narration from him in which he laughed, and they asked him why was he laughing, and he said, because in the days of Jahiliyyah, prior to Islam, I had a god that was made out of dates, right? A date god who I used to worship. One day I became so hungry, I ate a piece of him. He said, thinking back to that, how ludicrous that was, that your God, you ate a part of your God. So that was the nature of that society. And it's something similar to the Hindus. You could say that is like a Hindu situation. They've got gods for everything, right? Every people have their own personal gods. We're talking about millions of gods. So in that period, and you've got to remember also that the Hindus do have a belief in one supreme being, right? They have a belief, Brahman, one supreme being who is without beginning, without end, is unfathomable. You can't put any form to him, and all this kind of description. It's talking about Allah, really. But who worships him? Nobody. They worship everything else. He's there. Philosophers among them, if you talk to them, they say, "Oh no, we're really monotheists." But the masses of the people are worshipping everything but the one God. So the message then came addressing this issue of worshipping one God, because that was the core, that was the beginning point of the Islamic faith. The second content point with regards to Allah, we find some verses in the Qur'an which address Allah's existence. Does he really exist? We're basically dealing with some people who held that he didn't. But if you look at the verses which talk about Allah's unity, you put them in one category, and the verses which talk about Allah's existence, it's like night and day. Those talking about Allah's existence are few, just a handful of verses, whereas those talking about Allah's unity are many. In other words, most verses which talk about Allah talk about his unity rather than his existence, meaning assuming that you already believe in him, correcting your view. Basically, correcting your view. Why? Because that is the nature of human society. The vast majority of human beings on the face of the earth have always believed in God. It's always been a minority among them that believed there was no God. Even during the communist era in Russia and in China, where both societies became societies promoting disbelief in God, the majority of people still believed in God, but they just hid it because you couldn't move ahead, you couldn't get hope for any future if you express belief in God. It means you're backward, you're primitive in your thinking, you're not worthy of advancement, to get higher positions, etc., if you are not a true communist. Right? So people submitted, but once the communist states crumbled in Russia, communist state crumbled there. In fact, in Russia, the percentage of those people, when they did surveys recently, within the last 10 years, surveys of those who believe in God in Russia put them amongst the highest in Europe. Among the highest in Europe. Russia, which was the home of communism, had a number which was like 80% of the people believed in God. I mean, comparable to France and, which didn't, although it's a secular society, belief in church, state is well established. Same thing in China. With the crumbling of the communist system in China, it's slowly crumbling. You find more and more people among them expressing belief in God. It's becoming wider and wider spread. Of course, the Communist Party is still trying to keep it under control, but it is increasing continually. The other topic which was dealt with, or a lot of verses of that period focused on, was the next life. But this was the unseen world. It's an extension of belief in Allah, that there is a world to come. So you find many verses, Allah gives examples for people who might believe in God, but they don't believe there's a world to come. This world is all that there is. You die and that's it. So Allah clarifies for them, giving examples of land where it appears dead and water falls on it and life comes back. The resurrection. We also find verses from the Meccan period dealing with other civilizations and what happened to them, because people of Arabia knew in their own traditions, the oral traditions handed down, and in the ruins that existed in different parts of Arabia, ruins of earlier civilizations. So Allah talks to them about these earlier civilizations and explains what happened to them as guidance to them to come to the correct path. The other major area had to do with the one system of worship which was implemented in Mecca, and that was Salah. Because that was now your link with God. Once you've established belief in God and His oneness, then you have to establish the link with Him. So daily prayer became the link. And that's why we said the first complete chapter of the Qur'an to be revealed was Surah Al-Fatiha, the first chapter of the book, the opening chapter, which is what we use in our daily prayers. The last major issue that we find in the Meccan verses is a challenge to the Arabs proving the miracle of the Qur'an. Arabs are challenged to produce a Qur'an like the Qur'an. 10 verses like any 10 chapters like any 10 chapters of the Qur'an. Then one chapter, and that challenge was repeated twice. Produce a single chapter like the smallest chapter of the Qur'an. And this was part of the establishment of the miracle, the living and continuous miracle of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Qur'an. Now if we shift to the Medinan period, between 622 and the Prophet ﷺ made Hijrah to Medina and his death in 632, 10 years. What we find there, as we said, is a circumstance of an Islamic state. The society is organized. So it needed revelation to deal with the needs of a state, of a an organized community with a head and people under it, who's, finances, economics, marriage, laws, all these other kinds of things had to be dealt with. So you find all of your laws were reviewed then, for the most part. We can say about 90% of the laws, legislation, which have to do with human society, were revealed in Medina. So even things like the prohibition of intoxicants, that came in Medina. In Mecca it wasn't dealt with. No, it was an evil, but because the community was scattered, the evil of it was not like it would be once you've established a community, where its evil becomes very prevalent, becomes very open, is affecting and harming the believers. So in Mecca it was just enough to warn them its evil is greater than its benefit. Similarly, gambling, eating of pork, the punishments for adultery, murder, theft, all of this was not done in Mecca. This was all revealed in Medina, because they're all connected now. Pork has to do with your food laws, setting up the food laws, gambling, finance, adultery, family law, murder, society, theft, property. You're dealing with people's property in the society. It has to be a system, an organized system has to be in place to protect it. Also, you find now the laws permitting jihad, fighting, for Muslims to fight in defense of themselves. In the Meccan period, they were prohibited. Don't fight. They were not allowed to fight. They were to be patient. Though there were exceptions that some of the Sahaba just couldn't take it, and they fought back. But in general, they were not permitted to fight. And the reason for that being, what was the reason? They would be wiped out. The numbers are few. Their resistance would then just cause the pagan to give them an excuse to wipe them out to a man. End of story. So, patience at that time. Whereas once the Muslim state is established, now you can have organized resistance to the pagan forces. Also, what we find in the Medinan period is verses which deal with the Christians and the Jews. In Mecca, they're only dealing with the pagans, basically. I mean, there were a few Christians and Jews, around Mecca, trading and these kinds of things. Some of them actually working there. But in Medina, you had a major community, the Jewish community, who were actually the founders of Medina. The original name of Medina was what? Yathrib. That's the name they gave it. It was a Jewish city. And that is why it is said that in the Knesset, the parliament, the Jewish parliament, their map of Greater Israel goes down and includes Medina, because they were the founders. They established the city of Medina. They were joined by two Arab tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, afterwards, but they were the founders. So the verses now deal with the Jews, and verses also dealing with the Christians. One might ask, why are there so many? If you compare the verses in the Qur'an dealing with the Jews with those dealing with the Christians, one finds that the number of verses dealing with the Jews are less than the verses dealing with the Christians, though Medina was a Jewish city. Why would that be? Why shouldn't there be more verses dealing with the Jews? Because they're dealing with the Jews on a day-to-day basis.
They were more closer to Islam?
Because the Christians were closer to Islam. They were closer to Islam. They were astray, no doubt. They're ad-dallin, as the Prophet ﷺ explained in Surah Al-Fatiha. But Allah goes on to say that they are closer to Islam. He clarifies in the Qur'an that they're closer. The believers amongst them are closer. Though they were converts from the Jews to Islam in Medina, but for the most part, the Jews are very close society. Even though in practice they were most like Muslims. Islamic law, if you look in terms of external practice, they're very similar. Laws concerning marriage and divorce and so many things, even of tahara and all these things, very, very similar. Yet, less verses because they're farther away. There's a harshness in their heart with regards to Islam. They have the knowledge and they turn away. Whereas for the Christians, their turning away is based on ignorance. When they find out the knowledge, you find them coming into Islam in droves. So Allah spends more time addressing verses addressing the Christians than He does addressing the Jews. But still, both are addressed. The last major group that are addressed in the Quran, outside of the Christians and the Jews, are the hypocrites, the munafiqun, who from an Islamic perspective, a munafiq is one who pretends to be a Muslim and is not. So when we say hypocrite, we have to qualify it. Hypocrite from an Islamic perspective. Because a hypocrite in English is just somebody who says or does something that he doesn't really believe in, or two-faced, is saying something which he doesn't do, whatever. It's a hypocrite. But in Islam, it means, with regards to belief in Allah and Islam, the teachings of Islam, the person pretends to be a Muslim when in fact they are not. So why do the verses in the Medinan period talk about hypocrites, but in the Meccan period they didn't?
Because in Mecca, nobody wanted to pretend to be a Muslim because they were prosecuted.
Prosecuted. Yeah, good point. That in Mecca, it was a liability to be a Muslim. If you're a Muslim, then you're in for a lot of problems. Persecution, torture, murder, all kinds of things were happening. Your property is stolen from you, all kinds of things were happening. So, where are you going to find hypocrites? Who's going to be a hypocrite then? No benefit in it. Whereas in Medina, Muslims are strong. Some people just want to be on the winning side, sharing the booty, this kind of attitude. So, it pays. Or, they want to undermine Islam, to destroy it from within. So, like Paul of Tarsus, you pretend to be one of them. As they say, if you can't beat them, join them. So you pretend to be one of them, joining their ranks while working against them from within. So that is a natural consequence of the establishment of the Islamic State and the strength of Islam. Looking at the Quran in terms of the major topics of the Quran, scholars have put them into three fields of study, three basic areas of learning. The first area has to do with Aqidah, whether it's belief in Allah, His angels, His scriptures, His prophets, the hereafter, resurrection, and things connected to that. It's all called Aqidah. And later on people called it Ilmul Kalam also. Ilmul Kalam. Or scholastic, they call it scholastic theology. The second category deals with the reformation of human character, purifying the heart, making the deeds of the heart and the soul noble, creating the ideal character, the righteous individual. That area is known in English as ethics, right? And in Arabic they call it ilm al-akhlaq, or the science of moral character. The third major area or field of study is that of issues which are related to the external, the person's body, whether it is murder, you have laws dealing with that, wealth, inheritance, or marriage. These are all dealing with the social makeup of the society. That's the other area. So we have Aqidah, we have Ilm al-Akhlaq, and what may be called the Fiqh, the Sharia and Fiqh, Islamic law, dealing with society and society's needs. Now, if we move on to the legal content of the Qur'an, we find that it deals with two basic areas. One, with Allah, laws governing how human beings should relate to Allah. And the second, human beings and other human beings. How should they relate to other human beings? The laws governing. Included in that are laws governing the creatures. Why they would include it there? Because the creatures have been created, the creatures of the earth, whether they're from the plant world or from the animal world, they were created by Allah for human society. So, meaning that other human beings are to benefit from them. So if people abuse them, then they are abusing and making it difficult for other human beings to benefit from them. So that's why it's brought under the general heading of relations between human beings. So we have relations which have to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those relations may be either what we may call pure worship, acts of pure worship, like salah, or they may be social and economic commandments, like zakah, which has to do with the economy of the society, or there may be acts which have to do with the physical body, sacrifice to purify and to strengthen the inner body, the inner soul, like fasting and Hajj. Now if we look at the area of human societal dealings, we have laws which are revealed to protect the family structure, first and foremost, because the family is the building block of society. If the family is correct and righteous and protected, then the society becomes righteous and protected. If the family breaks down, then the society breaks down. So we have a variety of laws which address marriage, divorce, inheritance, and all these kinds of things. This is one major area of social dealings. Right? The second area is the area which has to do with property and business transactions. Because human beings exist as a society. They cannot exist in a vacuum. A person cannot exist by himself. He must depend on other people. That is the norm. I mean, you do find some people going off as hermits up on some mountain someplace. Okay, you do have a few of those. But, Even the person living off on the top of a mountain, he ends up having to come down for something, right? He may limit his contact with the rest of society, but in the end, he cannot produce everything he needs. He can't produce everything he needs. Therefore, he must depend on other human beings. So, that relationship with other human beings involves trade, barter, this kind of thing. So, regulations dealing with this were enacted. We find in the Qur'an a number of different laws concerning business transactions, riba, all the different elements. The third area are criminal laws to protect the family as well as to protect the property. So we have a series of laws, setting particular punishments for those who break them. And the fourth area is that of laws which are enacted to promote Islam and to defend it. To promote Islam and to defend it. And that area we refer to as jihad. The laws concerning jihad. Promotion of good and prohibition of evil in society, whether on an individual level, beginning with the individual, or on a society to society level, dealing with other societies. So those represent the four basic areas wherein laws were enacted to deal with human beings in the context of their societies. Okay, I think the next stage is to go into the basis of legislation in the Qur'an. We'll save that for the next class. If we have questions now, we'll deal with them. Otherwise, we can look at some portion of this, introduce the topic anyway, and complete it in the next session. Any questions concerning what we've covered so far? There's no time to give you a break because we started a bit late. Question concerning the gradual nature of the revelation of the laws, principles. Whether this gradual revelation is applicable to a person gradually changing in Islam, taking into account the fact that a person may have deviated or they were non-Muslim, they became a Muslim. Do we allow them to gradually change, or should we say, no, now you know Islam, you're supposed to do everything? In the case of a new Muslim, there is an allowance, and that's why even if a new Muslim slips, makes some major mistakes, they will not necessarily apply the law to them immediately. If they're just a couple of days, they just accept Islam. As they're growing, their faith becomes more established, they understand, etc. Whereas, in the case of a person who was involved in some form of corruption, sin, disobedience, etc., and the knowledge comes to them, is it okay for them to gradually come out of it, or should they give it up immediately? Well, the basic position is that they should give it up immediately. However, in dealing with such people, we in Dawah would have to be patient and try to encourage them to give it up as they are able. For us to be hammering on them, you got to give it up right now, we drive them away in general. If you're in a position of authority, that's a different situation. Position of authority, then you bring the law down, stop it. Smoking, for example. In a position of authority, then you ban smoking. Finish. Across the board. No smoking allowed in this country. You know, only one country in the world where they've banned smoking 100%. They're not allowed to even bring it in the country. It's not a Muslim country. Anybody know that country? No. It's a country called Bhutan, right? Which is a little country, next to Nepal, which has banned it across the board, not allowed to smoke in the country at all. They instituted laws forbidding smoking or importation of cigarettes or its sale in the country. MashaAllah. Right. So, if you're in a position of authority, you know this thing is harmful, then as a ruler or a person in authority, you are supposed to ban it across the board. You don't give people time, okay, you can work with the patches for the next year. After that, then, everybody has to give it up. No. You bring the law in, it is forbidden, harmful, and you stop it immediately. But when you're not in a position of authority, now it's just the issue of you trying to encourage people who are in a society which permits them to do these things, then you have to be patient. You have to, encourage, because if you're just going to say, okay, you don't want to give it up, I don't have anything to do with you. If that's going to be your attitude, then you're not going to be able to deal with too many people. Because most people have some weaknesses, some faults, etc. And they don't give it up immediately. It takes time for them to grow out of it or whatever. So that principle, as we said, it has its value or it has meaning in certain contexts, but in some other contexts it doesn't. So we have to look at the principle and look at the context. The other question concerning hypocrites or munafiqun, the question is whether it could be said that those Muslims who may be working within non-Muslim governments or non-Muslim systems, maybe even working against Muslims, can we call these people hypocrites? No. You can't do that, because if you call them a hypocrite, then in fact you're calling them a non-Muslim. If you call them a hypocrite, you're calling them a non-Muslim. Maybe you can say that they are doing some of the acts of hypocrisy. There's a difference between doing an act of hypocrisy and being a hypocrite. So we have to be very careful in using that terminology, munafiq, to call somebody that, is to call him or her a disbeliever. So that terminology should not be used, except in very special cases where it becomes clear, a person admits or whatever, then you have clear evidence. Otherwise, you don't have the right to make that kind of judgment. Because if Ubay bin Salul, who was known as the hypocrite, not openly, but understood, but nobody declared him the hypocrite. He worked against Islam from within, but Prophet ﷺ did not declare him a hypocrite. And the community accepted him. They had to accept him within the ranks of Muslims. He was not declared a disbeliever, though that information was there. And the Prophet ﷺ could have declared it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow the Prophet ﷺ to do that. And even when the Sahaba, who realized that this man was working against Islam, they asked Prophet ﷺ permission to take him out, to kill him, to execute him. Prophet ﷺ said, no. We don't want it said that Muhammad is killing his followers. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, to preserve the unity of Islam and to promote, its well-being and its righteousness, then that was not implemented, even though it was, you could say, known by default that this was actually the case. Okay, inshallah, with that we'll break early.
As we know, after the battle of Badr, okay, and most of the prisoners of war, they were not executed. Instead, and when the revelation came that that they should have been executed, then was that revelation followed after that, or what? Was that command followed?
Brother's question concerning the prisoners of Badr, who Prophet Muhammad allowed to go free or to buy their ransom, or be ransomed by teaching 10 Muslims how to read and write. Then Allah corrected him, saying that it was not really befitting for the messenger to let the prisoners free before having established his rule in the land. And having the upper hand, you can let your enemy go free through ransom, etc., etc. But when you are weak and they have the upper hand, to let them free is to let them have another shot at you. So Allah said, execute them, the prisoners. Since they had killed your people, because that's what it is, talking about an eye for an eye. How many Muslims were killed in Mecca, tortured to death in Mecca? So, now is your chance to get back at them for what they did, put fear in their hearts, don't give them another shot at you. So you do that. The question is, was that followed by the Prophet ﷺ afterwards? Well, after that, the Muslims became established in Medina. They became strong enough in Medina that it was no longer necessary. But that is the option given to the Muslim forces, depending on the circumstance. Again, you look at it with fiqh. You don't just take it, okay, as soon as we catch prisoners, we execute them. No. But you look at the circumstances. Had they been killing Muslims, did they, execute Muslim prisoners? Because that's what they were doing. When they caught any Muslim, they would torture him and kill him. Torture him until he, made statements of kufr, or they would kill him, since he refused. Right? So, depending on how the enemy has treated you, or treated your people when they've caught them, etc., you have the option of either taking their lives for the lives of your people, or the other route which Prophet ﷺ took, which was of allowing them to ransom themselves and even letting some of them go without any ransom. Okay, with that, inshallah, we close our session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك